Module 6 is the sugar industry. What this module is intended to provide is a background to the sugar industry within Australia. We will also be identifying any developing or current areas of specific importance to the industry rather than a general overall basis. Our objectives in this module should have you being able to have a knowledge of how the sugar industry developed in Australia, be able to explain the reasons for using varieties within the Australian industry, have an understanding of growth, processing and marketing of sugar, and lastly, to be able to identify areas of developing issues in the industry. We recommend that you read Chapter 3 of Cohen and Baxter. We'll start with the history of sugar in Australia. The genus of sugar cane is believed to have originated in Papua New Guinea, but the first Australian sugar cane was once again imported from the African settlement of the Cape of Good Hope. Sugar cane did not grow in Sydney, but was established on Norfolk Island. It wasn't until 1862, when 8 hectares of cane were grown outside of Brisbane by Captain Louis Hope, with assistance from John Hope of the West Indies, that sugar cane was seen as a viable crop. Hope secured his cane from T.A. Scott, who was commissioned to try and establish sugar in the northern areas of New South Wales in 1823, and based upon the cane he sourced from Scott, Hope established a refinery at Ormiston in 1865, and within 2 years 800 hectares of land was planted to cane in the district. Sugarcane rapidly established as a following as people worked north, with mills opening in Bowen in 1865, Maryborough and Mackay in 1866, Bundaberg in 1872, and Cairns in 1882. In 1868, there were 9 mills in New South Wales which produced 60 tonnes of sugar. This continued through to today, with the focus on the Clarence, Richmond and Tweed River valleys. The cane in Bowen was produced by a Mauritius grower, J.F. Kelsey, and whilst 30 tonnes of sugar and 3,729 gallons, that's 16,600 litres of rum, was produced in 1868, the climate was not entirely suitable for this operation, and it closed. By this 1868 date, there were 6 mills in Queensland and had rapidly grown to 102 mills in New South Wales, and remarkably 166 mills in Queensland by 1885. Many of these were on-farm mills operated by the family, and it wasn't until 1869 that cooperative mills were established in the Mackay district. The Queensland industry was assisted in its development by its exploitation of overseas workers through the establishment of the Coolie Act in 1862, which provided cheap working conditions for Asiatics who were indentured to a farm and owner. Captain Robert Towns then took this step one step further in 1863, when he found that Indian workers were not available, and he sailed his schooner to the New Hebrides, where labourers were recruited, and also blackbirded into service in the cotton and cane plantations of Caboolture, Cleveland, Maryborough and Bundaberg. The Pacific Islanders, known as Kanakas, were used heavily in the establishment of the industry. The opportunity for men of capital to establish sugar plantations, employing 40 to 200 labourers in the fields. The plantation companies constructed their own mills, and a small elite group of white managers and overseers supervised the work of gangs of coloured labour. Working conditions for the labour lines were harsh, and the returns meagre, and by 1877 most island labourers were landing in Mackay. It was Edward Knox and his son, Edward William Knox, who took over the Clarence River refineries of the Australian Sugar Company in 1843. That took milling to the next level. Between them, they travelled extensively to other sugar-growing areas of the world and brought back to Australia the latest in milling technology for the now colonial Sugar Refining Company Limited, or CSR. E.W. Knox settled upon forward grower contracts, payment for cutting and transporting cane, and then additional incentive payments for quality cane. In 1870, after a trip to the West Indies, he brought to northern New South Wales double crushing of cane to achieve higher sugar recovery, as well as better boiling meaning that he crushed 13.27 tonnes of cane per hour in 1879 compared to 7 tonnes per hour in 1871, with coal usage down from 1 tonne per 6.5 tonnes of cane to 1 tonne of coal for every 13.7 tonnes of cane in 1879. E.W. Knox was then appointed as General Manager of CSR in 1880, and he expanded operations into Fiji and New Zealand. In 1887, taking advantage of an Australian tariff system, the Colonial Sugar Refining Company became an Australian-based limited liability company and expanded to 15 mills. Meanwhile, there were problems in Queensland with their exploitation policies. In 1884, recruitment ship crews were charged for illicit recruiting and murder, and these incidents, together with a riot by islanders at Mackay, fuelled opposition to coloured labour. Sickness also took its toll. In 1884, there were 1,743 islander deaths reported, a mortality rate of 14% of the total islander population in Queensland. Islanders were no longer regarded as the most efficient of the labour forces, and pressure grew from planters to allow the recruitment of Indian labour. Following a Royal Commission into the traffic in Pacific Islanders in 1885, legislation was introduced for the cessation of the recruitment of Pacific Islanders after 1890. The decline of mining in the early 20th century resulted in men turning to the cane fields for employment. New estates were subdivided for sugar lands, and new mills were erected at Babinda, South Johnston, and Inkerman in 1914 and 15. North Queensland was well on its way to becoming the yeomanry of small farmers visualised by Griffith. The new settlers were pioneers, but it was pioneering in which the whole family took part. Until the mills were working, the family kept themselves in whatever jobs were offering. The area of cane in northern Queensland increased from 57,954 to 78,013 acres between 1906 and 1917. A dramatic restructuring of the sugar industry ensued. In the Mackay district, the 28 plantations and 2 central mills of 1885 gave way to large central mills cooperatively owned by small farmers. By 1900, there were 5 farmer-controlled mills, which outproduced the 7 remaining plantation mills. By 1925, 7 central mills produced 3 times as much sugar as the 30 mills of 1885. After World War I, stable prices and improved rail access resulted in further expansion of sugar lands. The area under cane increased from 162,619 acres in 1920 to 269,509 acres in 1925. Yields also increased as a result of the work of sugar experiment stations, and mechanical harvesting was demonstrated with the Faulkner harvester in 1924. Thus, by 1924, there was overproduction for the Australian market, and sugar exports were commenced. By 1928, about 200,000 tonnes had to be exported, despite instructions by the Central Board from 1927 to 1929 to limit mill assignments. Internationally, there was overproduction of sugar, and world prices declined from 1928 to 1933. Ferrymead, near Bundaberg, was using the Howard cane harvester by 1934. Following the Second World War, the Australian sugar industry was expanded once it overcame a labour shortage. The immediate post-war production of 950,000 tonnes was increased 1.3 million tonnes by 1954. The successful introduction of mechanical harvesting dates from 1960. In 1961, some 5% of the Australian cane harvest was undertaken by mechanical means, but this increased to 48.5% in 1966 and 98.5% in 1974. The economics of mechanical harvesting also resulted in huge increases in the total cane harvest. In 1961, the total cane harvest was approximately 9.4 million tonnes, and by 1974 this had increased to 20.4 million tonnes. The new machines provided chopped cane, which required new approaches to transport. The industry is still dominated by Queensland growers, with smaller operations in northern New South Wales and a developing following in the Ord River of Western Australia. But here it competes with other high-profit small crops for space. There are around 6,000 growers in Queensland, with farms generally ranging from 25 hectares to 250 hectares in size, with an average of around 6,000 to 8,000 tonnes of cane produced, and still over 90% of Australia's sugarcane is grown in Queensland. While several mills have closed in the past decade, growers deliver over 35 million tonnes of cane, yielding over 4.6 million tonnes of sugar. Main production areas. The sugar industry is located predominantly in coastal Queensland, with smaller production areas in northern New South Wales and the Ord irrigation area of Western Australia. The industry is divided into the following production areas: the northern regions, Mossman, Tableland, Babinda, Warollan, Mulgrave, South Johnston and Tully Mill areas. And there's a Herbert, Burdekin region, Inkerman, Invicta, Calamia, Macnard, Pioneer and Victoria Mill areas. And we have the central region, Farley, Marion, Plain Creek, Plaistow, Proserpine and Racecourse Mill areas. The southern region, Bingra, Ferrymead, Isis, Maryborough, Milliquin, Moreton and Rocky Point Mill areas. And the New South Wales region, Broadwater, Condong and Hardwood Mill areas. The proportion of Australia's sugar area within each of these regions: the northern mill area has an assigned area of about 113,931 hectares, harvesting 88,119 hectares of cane, which is 23% of the Australian sugar area. Herbert Burdekin area has 149,576 hectares, harvesting 118,473 hectares of cane, which is 31% of the total Australian sugar area. Central has an assigned area of 144,000 hectares, harvesting 108,907 hectares of cane, or 28% of the total sugar area. Southern, 102,372 hectares, resulting in 70,624 hectares of actual sugarcane harvest, 18% of the Australian sugar area. New South Wales has 34,374 hectares, from which 18,818 hectares of cane are harvested, which makes up 5% of the national product, and Western Australia harvests 3,670 hectares of cane, which is about 1% of the total Australian sugar area. Approximately half of Australia's sugar cane is grown in irrigated production methods. Close to 80% of Australia's production is exported onto the world market to compete primarily with Brazil and Asian sugar cane and European sugar beet production. Around the world, 75% of all sugar is produced from sugar cane, with the balance being from sugar beets. Around 60% of sugar is processed into raw sugar, with the balance being refined further into white sugar, etc. The leading raw sugar exporters of the world today include Brazil, Australia, India, Thailand, Guatemala, Cuba, and South Africa. The leading raw sugar importers around the world today include Russia, European Union, Indonesia, United Arab Emirates, South Korea, Malaysia, Japan, United States, Canada, Saudi Arabia, Nigeria, Algeria, and China. Key characteristics of Australian sugar producers and farms include the following industry and state averages. The median age of owners or managers is 49 years for the industry, which is the same in Queensland. In New South Wales, have a median age of 51 for their owner managers, and Western Australia 67. The education of owner managers, how many have completed university or tertiary or trades qualifications. The industry average is 21%, which again is equal to the Queensland proportion, and New South Wales it is higher at 30%. Owner managers who work 40 hours per week or more on the farm, 82% is the industry average, 83% in Queensland, 76% in New South Wales. Level of farm incomes, the industry average is $55,322 in 2009, a little higher in Queensland at $58,626, but down to $23,498 in New South Wales. The level of debt, the industry average is $298,727 as the industry average, higher in Queensland at $308,695 and lower in New South Wales at $204,179. Level of off-farm income, the industry average is $20,188. Queensland, it's $20,796, and New South Wales, $14,446. In 1996, an environmental audit was undertaken of farmers in the Queensland Sugar District. This audit reviewed a range of environmental parameters on 130 cane farms throughout Queensland and surveyed management practices and farm attitudes at each farm. Consultation was also held with various other stakeholders such as Aboriginal groups, conservation groups, research organisations and local, state and Commonwealth government staff. The audit identified areas or issues of high environmental risk and areas of high priority for industry response. These risk areas and industry response areas were grouped into the following categories. High priority recommendations of the audit based on an assessment of high risk of environmental impact and or effect on production levels were grouped into the following categories: irrigation and drainage, riparian vegetation protection, maintenance of creek configuration, waterway erosion prevention, drainage restriction to low-lying acid sulfate areas, licensing for irrigation from watercourses. Soil management, acid sulfate soil identification and management, minimising tillage during periods of high erosion risk. Thirdly, dangerous goods and chemicals, the importance of licensing for fuel storage greater than 10,000 litres. Fourth, fertiliser management, appropriate fixative measures on bare soil, careful monitoring of usage and soil testing to ensure correct application, prevention of leaching into groundwater, prevention of runoff to surface water, appropriate storage measures. Fifth, herbicide management, appropriate guidelines for use, appropriate storage management. Sixth, waste management, waste tyre recycling, bunding of diesel tanks, appropriate disposal of waste chemical containers and irrigation materials, rehabilitation of farm dumps, appropriate storage of waste lead acid batteries, appropriate design and use of oil spray pads. Lastly, ecology and conservation, prevention of wetland draining and cropping, maintenance of good community perception of the industry through adherence to legislation, increased understanding and appropriate management of regional habitats. The main pieces of legislation in Queensland for this are the Environmental Protection Act of 1994 and the Chemical Usage, Agricultural and Veterinary Control Act of 1988. These were both amended as parts of the Great Barrier Reef Protection Amendment Bill in 2009 and deal with water entering the coastal areas of Queensland, chemical, herbicide and fertiliser use and runoff. Soil type, rainfall and production. The first part of this discussion is to define a number of terms which are more particularly related to the sugar industry. These include assignment. This term, previously used to describe the right or licence to grow sugarcane and supply a particular mill, now called a cane production area, was replaced in 2005 by deregulation, and instead a cane supply agreement must be obtained. Billets, a common name for a chopped length of cane produced by a mechanical harvester, usually about 300 millimetres in length. Cane supply agreement, an agreement between a grower and a miller for at least 1 year, or it can be a multiple of years. Grower can supply one or more mills, and the agreement gives a certainty to the grower and miller over the amount to be supplied. CCS, commercial cane sugar, is an estimate based upon analysis of pure sugar recoverable from cane, expressed as a percentage. Historical production records. These include the area, average CCS and tonnes harvested in each season, and are generally available for the preceding 5 seasons, available from the mill with grower permission. Mill peak, a redundant term under deregulation, but was the total sugar a mill expected to pay number 1 pool price for from the assigned cane area. Mill plan, a plan of the farm produced by the mill to which the cane is sold, showing the blocks of cane, variety of cane, age of block and area of blocks. Out of hand. This is a stage when the cane grows too tall for mechanical weeding, fertilising, etc., and is then left to its own growth. Ratoon. Cane that grows, that is, regrows, from the buds of the residual stump left in the ground after harvesting. One plant crop can usually have 4 ratoon crops, although this may be more or less depending upon the health of the stool. The decision may be affected by a change in smut and rust-resistant strains or better yield varieties. Set. A piece or billet of cane with buds or eyes which are used as plant material to re-establish a crop on a block. Stool. A cluster of cane stalks rising from the germination of a cane set or regrowth of a ratoon stool. Trash blanket. A layer of cane leaves, tops, etc. left on the ground after a green cane harvest to suppress weed growth, retain moisture and minimise erosion, etc. Burnt cane. The cane is fired to remove trash, weeds, etc., which makes it quicker to harvest. This, however, reduces the sugar content, means a quicker harvest required, or quality drops and some mills pay less due to soot removal. Green cane. Harvested as a green product with leftover leaves, tops, etc., spilled on the ground. Sugarcane is a member of the grass species and as such has reasonably tolerant requirements for production. These include at least 1,500 millimetres of rain each year or access to irrigation, temperatures over 21 degrees Celsius while growing, flat to gently sloping land, fertile and well-drained soil. Sugarcane is grown from sets, cuttings from mature cane stalks, which are planted by a machine which form a furrow. Cut the cane stalks into about 40 centimetre pieces, drop them into the furrows, add fertiliser and cover them with soil. A few weeks after planting, new shoots grow from the nodes, the growing plants, of the sugar cane cuttings. As many as 12 stalks can grow from one set. Weeding and fertilising are carried out, sometimes with high clearance machines, until the cane is out of hand. Irrigation and fertiliser are also used to supplement growth depending upon the climate, conditions, availability, etc. Sugarcane grows ideally for about 12 to 16 months before being harvested, between June and December each year, for the crushing. When harvested, the cane generally stands 2 to 4 metres high. If the cane has not reached a desired growth, it can be held over for a second growth period, but this cane will seed, which reduces some vigour and generally does not yield the same CCS levels, but has a larger bulk for an overall increase in sugar production. Legislation and growing restrictions. Like most of Australia's agricultural industries, the sugar industry was also highly regulated for most of its existence, but has undergone a deregulation process over more recent times. The original legislation controlling the industry involved the Sugar Agreement Act, the Sugar Acquisition Act, Regulation of Sugar Cane Price Act, and the Sugar Experimentation Act. This was intended to control importation of sugar from other countries, control where cane was grown, assignment, control the quality of the cane grown, peel, where cane could be transported, to which mill, and the sale price of assigned lands. This all changed with the passing of the Sugar Industry Act in 1999. Assignments, mill and production peaks, and cane production areas are no longer controlled. There is no hard and fast rule of which mill a grower supplies, and in theory, a grower could supply a number of mills. Production now revolves around the cane supply agreement, as defined earlier. Legislation has controlled the varieties of cane able to be grown in Queensland through the Sugar Experimentation Station Act and the development of the Bureau of Sugar Experimental Stations, the BSES. This was first established in 1900, and is still the main research and development arm for the Queensland sugar industry. The primary focus of the BSES is the breeding of new and improved sugarcane varieties, which are either higher yielding, in other words, superior CCS or growth, or disease or pest resistance, cane smut and rust, which are both fungal diseases. When a new variety is developed, it is placed on an approved variety list, with changes to the list having to be approved by the Department of Primary Industries and Fisheries. Growers may only grow sugarcane which is on this approved list. The deregulation has even altered the payment system for growers and millers. Under the previous system, the grower owned the cane and the Queensland Government, through Queensland Sugar Limited, owned the processed sugar. The miller owned nothing. The sugar was sold by Queensland Sugar Limited, and the proceeds were distributed on the mill-grower equation of 1/3 to the mill and 2/3 to the grower, with minor variations due to sugar content and the mill's coefficient of work. This will be discussed more in the valuation aspects section of this module. Marketing. The state government controls Queensland Sugar Limited, which is the exclusive marketer of Queensland's annual raw sugar output. Their website lists their profile as a leader in raw sugar marketing. QSL, Queensland Sugar Limited, has built an excellent reputation for quality, service and innovation in the Asian sugar market. QSL works on behalf of Australian sugar millers and growers to build sustainable business partnerships with sugar refiners in the Asia-Pacific region. QSL is responsible for more than 90% of Australian sugar exports and grows the value of this sugar by offering a one-stop shop for international customers, incorporating superior logistics and shipping solutions, a range of product options including other origin sugar, and sophisticated risk and financial management solutions. Sugar is exported through bulk terminals, locations of which are shown in the figure, which is in the study guide. The bulk terminals are run by a related company, Sugar Terminals Limited, and are capable of storing 2.5 million tonnes of raw sugar. A total of 360 million shares in this company were issued to growers and millers in August of 2000, based on production over the previous 9 years. There are G shares for growers and M shares for millers. The shares are tradable on the Newcastle Stock Exchange, but can only be sold to producers. If a farm is sold and a grower does not have other cane lands, the shares must be disposed of within 2 years, or they will be compulsorily sold and the proceeds sent to the vendor. Valuation aspects. The return to the farm. Previously, the miller did not own the sugar at any time, but proceeds were distributed under a formula developed in the 1920s. This was altered by deregulation, with the miller now purchasing the cane from the grower under the cane supply agreement. The miller now has responsibility for marketing the sugar. However, all millers except Mossman and Mulgrave signed a voluntary marketing agreement with Queensland Sugar Limited, so principally a single desk still operates for the sugar industry. Mills have the right to market domestically, whilst QSL handles export markets. The mills pay the growers based on the QSL discretionary pool price, which is the price QSL receives for exported sugar. The original agreement was for the 2006 and 2007 seasons. Sugar prices have been very low since the 1990s, with the major drop in price in the 1999 precipitating the new Sugar Industry Act of 1999. Since then, there has been several rationalisations in the milling, with the Moreton Mill in Nambour closing in 2000, Ferrymead closing in 2005, Moreland in 2006 and Plaistow in 2009. The 2010 season has seen a major resurgence in world sugar prices to a 40-year high of 17.73 US cents per pound, with the seasonal sugar pool calculating a return of $475 per tonne of cane to growers. The cane supply agreement determines how much a grower will receive, and these agreements can be negotiated upon any basis. The initial agreements, though, have closely mirrored the historical mill-grower equation. This formula is written as the price of sugar minus the price of cane times 0.009 times the CCS minus 4 plus 69.8 cents. This last number may vary depending upon the mill and agreement, etc. The current policy from the Proserpine mill at May 2010 was V equals 0.009 times P outside of A minus 4 plus 65.8 cents, where V is the price of cane in dollars per AQ tonne, P is the QSL discretionary pool price of sugar in dollars per tonne. IPS sugar exclusive of GST is received from Queensland Sugar Limited or its successors. A is the mill average payment, CCS for the season. AQ tonnes relates to average quality tonnes and is calculated by multiplying the tonnes of cane delivered on any day by the ratio of that cane CCS to the relevant daily mill average CCS. And IPS is International Polarity Scale, as used for the sale of premium raw sugar. These formula assume a mill efficiency at 90%. The difference that a CCS count can make is shown below in the calculations based on those of Mick Tapiolis of the State Valuation Service. Example 1. Using the money received by the grower for cane supplied, as reflected as a sugar price of $350 per tonne and based upon a CCS of 11. Works out to be 0.009 times $350 per tonne, all multiplied by 11 minus 4, all plus 0.658. That works out to be $22.708 per tonne of cane. And there are two other examples that we won't read out. You can find those in the study guide. The residual value of the return. Information that is available to growers from the mill, which is useful for the valuer, may also include the mill plan and historical production records. Another aspect of sugarcane, which differs from the previous agricultural industries, is that there is a value in the return cane stool. Once wheat is harvested, there is little value in the remaining stubble, whereas the ability of cane to regrow from the return means that a value must be established for this inherent crop. The return of the return will vary because of the district, soil type, irrigation versus dryland, and management practices. Each case will need to be individually assessed, but it will be based on a calculation similar to this. Production figures for the farm over the estimated return period need to be established. This will be in consultation with the grower and historical production records. Once this is done, the following table can be produced. Planting cane or plant cane, 120 tonnes per hectare. First return, 100 tonnes per hectare. Second return, 90 tonnes per hectare. Third return, 80 tonnes per hectare. And fourth return, 75 tonnes per hectare. giving you a total of 465 tonnes per hectare. So over the lifetime of the stool in this example, we expect a production of 465 tonnes per hectare. After each crop has been harvested, the remaining potential return diminishes, and so the remaining yield potential is, for the first return, the remaining yield is 345 tonnes, or a potential of 345 over 465, which is 74% remaining. Second return, remaining yield is 245, which is a 53% percentage of the potential return over the planting cost. Third return is 155 tonnes, or 33% still remaining. And the fourth return of 75 tonnes results in 16% percentage of potential return over the planting cost. And so the stool reduces in value for each return until it is not economically viable and it is removed and replanted. Inspection issues. There are two areas which have a major bearing upon cane production which should be addressed at inspection. One is the production land quality, and the other is water use or irrigation availability. Using the mill plan as a basis, the valuer should discuss the soil types and topography with the owner. Any soil changes should be noted, as they will vary the fertiliser rates, irrigation requirements, etc. Always note which blocks the grower feels are the best and worst, and try to gain an understanding as to why this is the case during inspection. Common production problems include stone, gullies, poor drainage areas, poor paddock sizes or shapes, and sandy or gravel patches within paddocks. Areas not under cane also need to be addressed, and the management of runoff, particularly in relation to sediment and chemicals, with the aforementioned legislation issues, together with buffer zones to stream systems, needs to be checked and verified for compliance. Chemical use may also relate to the ability of a property to be used for further functions, with some beef meat holding practices holding traces of chemicals when the animals were grazed on former cane land in rotation. There is also the use of rotation crops such as peanuts, tomatoes and soybeans with the sugarcane to allow land to recover, water tables to adjust, weeds to be suppressed, etc. Water use. Approximately half of Queensland sugarcane is irrigated, with areas such as the Tablelands, Birketon, Mackay, Bundaberg and Maryborough having extensive irrigation systems, while other districts such as the Herbert River, Innisfail, Tully and Cairns relying on heavy annual rainfall for dry land production. Other valuation issues. Other things to consider in the valuation of sugarcane farm include areas such as harvesting and cartage haulage rates, scaling of works and flood impacts. With regard to haulage, it is advisable to understand the location and distance to a loading facility, what is charged to get the cane to the facility, the district average, and if the mill pays any subsidies. Scaling of work is important as machinery and farm size change and economies of scale developed. Other areas of operation, such as stone and drainage issues, should be also addressed. Flooding can be a major impact, as many farms are on flood plains. This results in such issues as erosion, stool destruction from submersion, crop knockdown, debris in paddocks, etc. A flowing water flood is generally considered worse than a flood created by the backup of water onto the property. Below is a sales analysis with production breakdown for a sugarcane farm, and you may read that in the study guide. Summary. The sugar industry is approximately $1.5 billion of export for Australia, ranking it at number 6 in rural industries in Australia. There is a major challenge in addressing overseas competition, as most products, about 80%, are exported. The variation in price and the strength of the Australian dollar means that farm income is highly variable, even if seasonal conditions are regular. This is a brief overview into the industry, but seek more information and guidance as you enter into rural valuation practice in the sugar industry.